Welcome to Soldiers Hill Angus Farm. This is our hay seminar that was scheduled for today that was canceled due to the COVID restrictions. I'm Dennis Pearson. This is the famous Tim Mize from the Extension Service. At Soldiers Hill Angus Farm, we are a registered Angus and Sim-Angus seed stock operation. We do a lot of hay, and that's what today's meeting's about, is our hay production. We are very concerned about quality because about a third of our income comes from hay sales to our horse clientele. So we want to make sure that we harvest it as best we can, we want to store it as best we can, and we want to feed it so that we don't waste very much hay. So Tim and I are going to show you some storage methods and feeding methods that we've come up with, and we're going to move over to our new hay feeding pad that we developed this summer and go over that with you. So Tim, you tell me how you want to operate today and we'll go forward.
Well, I say let's go over and let's start the tour of the new facility you built.
All right.
Well, again, Dennis, thanks for inviting us out and letting us videotape this and letting us be a partner in this whole thing. I guess a little background as to how this project came about. I know that originally you looked at some videos that came from the University of Kentucky on some hay feeding systems that they had, and then you approached me about, what could we do here? And so I know that in the past years you've had some issues with mud and that type of thing with hay rings. So what made you decide you wanted to build this facility?
With our seed stock operation, we're limited in land resources. We're not fortunate to have the graze 300 days a year philosophy. We have to feed our cattle because we are limited to 70 acres of wintertime. Part of that is we AI breed, we also use embryo transfer, so our cattle are confined to this small area of our farm. We run 500 acres, but our wintering ground is narrowed down to 70 acres. This property takes a lot of abuse in the wintertime. Coming in here feeding 8 round bales at a time, and I have to get out on every bale with my tractor in 12 inches of manure and what have you. It's, tough on equipment. Sometimes the cattle are hungry. They're not getting out of your way. It's dangerous to them. But the main thing was the conservation. We're on the banks of Great Run here, which flows into the Rappahannock within a mile. We're 100 miles upstream from the Chesapeake Bay, so we wanted to do our part to improve water quality. There are no cost share monies involved with this project, but we wanted to do our part so that we could keep our property in better shape. We feel that it will reduce the need to seed every spring, so that'll help. It'll reduce wear and tear on our equipment. It's safer for our cattle. It'll be healthier for the calves. The cattle will not be their udders full of manure when those calves go to nurse in this facility. So that was the main reason why we built it. We did see some videos on YouTube from Eden Shell Farms, as you mentioned, and kind of got a lot of their ideas from that. In discussions with you and I, we came up with this thing. I had a tremendous guy that came in and did the forming here. You'll see that it's all curbed, so the manure is retained in here. The center aisle is raised 7 inches, so the cattle come in through these gates here and funnel on both sides. We feed the hay from the far end so the tractors never come in contact with the cattle. The hay is fed from the outside. We can push 10 round bales down this center aisle. This center aisle is sloped 6 inches. So the moisture will run from up there and come down here. As you can see on the curb, I don't know if the camera will show this, the curb slopes 6 inches to this point here and then levels out, and then the water flows down here and drains into the woods, not into the pasture. We have a manure storage area over here. So there's 2 different drainages here. From the manure storage, it drains down into that corner, so it will not drain back to where the cattle are. So when we scrape it, we can come in those end gates, open those gates up, and scrape the manure down here and into the pens.
Everything can be collected. He already mentioned this slopes backwards, so we capture everything that he pushes in gets captured into this, we'll call it a bunker, and then can be spread back out weather conditions permitting.
We don't spread manure in the wintertime. We mainly spread manure in the summer. July, August time frame is the best time to put manure on the ground when the soils are good and tight. And the cattle, what happens here, all of our cattle are moved out to summer pasture. So come about April 1st, April 10th, we try to give this whole place a rest, and they all go out on lease properties. And that's when we would put the manure out on the fields during the summer when they're not here and soil conditions warrant it. We can close these gates right here to keep the cattle out while we're working that and doing that. And we can also limit access to the feed. They don't have to have full-time feed. A lot of times we will give them 24-hour access to it, but if we wanted to limit the feed intake, we can do that. Another thing that we did in our design, we can push, I have a skid loader that can come through here. If any moldy hay gets in that center aisle and they don't eat it, I can push it out into here and then push it over to the manure storage so that it will, the moldy hay will be cleaned out. One other thing we thought about when Tim and I were going through our design here, that the gates that keep the cattle out of the manure storage area can be closed. That one gate will come around and make this a confined pen. So if we have an animal that comes in with foot rot or any issue that needs to be treated, we can catch them in this pen here, put them on our trailer, and take them over to a working facility. So that, and once you have them in here, you close all your gates and you just run it right on around and into there, close that gate, and you have that animal confined. So it also works as a working pen and a loadout. We have not used it yet. It'll be used here once the frost hits and our pasture runs out, which might 2 or 3 weeks away, 4 weeks away maybe. So we're looking forward to it. One other thing we had to do is make sure that our access, this will get the most wear and tear right here. There's a fabric cloth down below. There's 6 inches of number 3 stone and then 3 inches of 21A. So we know that there'll be some modifications once we use it over the winter. We'll probably have to take the gravel further out into the pasture to make sure that it doesn't, come a bunch of cattle tracks and paths or whatever. So there'll be some tweaking that we'll do to this facility after we've used it for 1 year. But we're really looking forward to getting away from the mud, manure, muck. I don't know if our camera shows the cattle down there on the gravel road. In past years, 2 years ago, we had a really, really wet winter. Everybody remembers the winter of 2018 when it was so wet. We had mud from this point right here all the way to that gravel road. And it was just not healthy for our cattle. So when we found out this spring that we were going to be isolated a while due to the COVID-19, we came up with a project, and this was it. So that was the reason for why. I might have rambled a little longer than you expected.
No, we went through a tour. I think it's worth noting, you've touched on this, but this entrance and exit point is always the issue with any of these feeding systems. And so, we're concentrating the animals coming in. We provided a great place to feed, but it's always dealing with this. And I think over time, if you come back, you'll probably see this expand out a little bit, especially as we get a little bit better idea how the cattle are going to access it. It's probably a little steeper than we originally intended, but we had to build up here, and so that sort of affected what we did on this entrance point.
We made the concrete thick so that it would hold up to our tractors and skid loader. We tried to average, but it actually turned out at some points deeper. Anywhere a tractor would come in and out, which is this gates and those 2 gates over there, it has a drop-down curve that's 2 foot of concrete, just a drop-down gutter there, so it can take the absorption of the 12,000-pound tractor coming in to scrape out. The alleyway where the hay is going to rest on and be pushed on, if a skid loader had to come through there, that's 5 inches thick. So where the cattle are and where the big tractors are going to be in here scraping out, is 6 inches thick, 5 inches in the center aisle. Normally, a concrete pad in your garage or basement is 4 inches thick. Due to the weight, we had to up that a little bit. Well, I kind of designed it for 50 cow-calf pairs. When we get into January, February, our calves are, getting on up there around 200 to 300 pounds, and with full access. Now, those calves, if you had limited access and only gave them 2 hours a day, then the calves would not get in there because the cows would keep them out. But with 24-hour access, those calves will get all they want. But we basically thought this would be for a 50 cow-calf units.
Let's talk a little bit about hay storage, something that's near and dear to my heart and also yours, and something probably that frustrates me more as I drive around the road and look at this. We really try hard to make good hay, and then oftentimes where we fail is at the storage end. And most of that rot, it's not happening in January. It's happening during the summer months prior to winter coming on when there's a lot of biological activity. And so it's imperative that we get it off the ground as quickly as we can and get it under cover. And I think I'm a big fan of hay tarps. They're fairly inexpensive, and if you take care of them, they'll last 5 years if you're careful. But I noticed one thing down here, you've got it setting on pallets. What's your reasoning for that?
Well, most of your hay rot is from wicking moisture out of the ground, and you're right, you need to get it under cover as quick as possible. I mentioned at the start that we take a lot of time and effort in making good hay. We want to make sure we store it properly, so those pallets, get it up off the ground, air is moving underneath of it, and there's ropes that we put under those pallets to tie these tarps down because wind is tremendous. You can see pipe on some of those. It's very rare that we have a tarp that'll blow off. And you're right, with proper care, as soon as we take a tarp off, we fold it up, don't let it get all wet, don't leave it laying on the ground, and we put it in a hayloft so that it use it next year. So once you get back from these end pieces, that hay that's in there looks like the hay that's in that barn. I mean, it'll come out in really good shape if you put it in there in the right moisture condition. If you put a stack of hay like this at 20% moisture, you're going to get mold. And so it needs to be good dry hay before you put it in there. Now, the hay that's in the barn on pallets, as you can see, we call that Coke can, stacked 3 high. That's mainly will be sold to our horse clientele. So our premium hay will go into the under roof. The hay that's in the tarp will be fed to cattle, or we do have some horse clientele that want just a native grass hay. That's another thing. We have orchard grass hay under roof. This is mainly native grass hay out here under the tarps. Our third method of storage is a wet wrap.
Yeah, let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
You sort of implied that this may be the better system, but I think it's more because of a marketing ploy and the way you sell this hay. It's just easier to remove this under a barn than to have to
take a tarp off, right? Right.
That's probably one of the biggest issues is as you pull that tarp back, you've got to continue to secure it because it's going to, unless you could feed that really quickly, you're going to get into wind conditions, and that's how a lot of tarps get ripped up.
That's true, yes.
Just flapping on the ends.
And you're probably right. It is a marketing thing. Those bales maintain their shape better stacked in a Coke can, whereas these pyramided on their side will condense down over time. So they'll be egg-shaped versus a perfect round bale shape if they're on a Coke can or stacked 3 high.
Right. All right, well, let's talk about your wrapping.
All right, this is a wet wrap product. It goes through a fermenting process, of course. We have it on pallets. I don't know that you really need to do that, but we like to stack it high. We don't use a tube inline wrapper because if you notice all the woods around here, we don't have a good long 1,000-yard run. We have small areas, so we go 3 high here, and it saves on space. You will see the electric wire around it. We have had bear come in and climb to the top of it, and when they climb to the top of it, they puncture every bale they touch with their claws, so you have to go through and tape them. We've also had raccoon. That's one one wire 6 inches off the ground. We've had raccoons come in and tear them up. So they love that fermented smell, the bears and the raccoons, and that's why we put electric wire around it. There's 323 wet wrap bales in this stack right here, and we try to take care to make sure they don't get tore up. It is beautiful feed when it comes out in the wintertime, and you slit that product open, take that stretch wrap off, it's sweet smelling, and the cattle will run to it. It's very good feed.
Yeah, and I'll just add, one of the reasons to put them on pallets is because rodents are a huge issue. And so if they're sitting on the ground, you'll tend to get mice and voles that will just sort of poke holes all through it. The other thing is, what are these bales? What does a wet bale weigh?
I would roughly say 1,600 pounds.
And what does one of your big dry bales weigh?
800.
Yeah, so
about double the weight.
So there's about 50% water in there, and that's one of the drawbacks to this, is that you're hauling water and you got that extra weight. And there are a lot of people with tractors that couldn't pick one of those up. And unless you have the proper equipment, you can't spear this unless you're going to finish it or eat it.
Feed it, yeah, feed it.
So the other thing I always like to say is that this doesn't make better feed, it just preserves the feed you put in there. So I get a lot of people that think they can put poor quality hay in, and when it comes out at the end, there's going to be some great feed. It's only as good as what went in there. And anytime we store feed, it decreases in value to some degree. Well, our job is to minimize that. But I think this is high quality feed. It's just going to be high in water, but this was sorghum Sudan in here, right?
It was, yes.
And so, it's really hard to dry that down, and this is a good way to get that quality on a product that if you waited for all the moisture to get out of the sorghum Sudan stalks, you'd be waiting on the ground too long, and you'd run into issues of too dry on the leaves, too wet on the stalks, and then of course a rainstorm coming in. So makes good quality feed. Just remember there's water in there that you have to transport, and some people are not happy with all the plastic they have to pick up.
Yeah. That is a problem. We make 2 trips a week to the landfill, and I'm actually researching getting a dumpster put on site, because there is some trash, and if you're conservation minded, it's a lot of stretch wrap. That's another thing. The expense of that stretch wrap is not cheap.
Right. What does that add per bale?
About $4.50 to $5 per bale of stretch wrap to keep it in there so that it does ferment correctly. So yes, there is some trash associated with that.
And we have looked at how do we, what can we do with this extra or this leftover wrap? Can we recycle it? And the problem is that no, and of course recycling is down right now with China, but one of the issues that we run into is there tends to be a lot of trash and dirt into these, and the recyclers frown upon that, and so they're looking for clean as they can get, and oftentimes come wintertime, the time we get these off, it's hard to keep these things clean enough. But if you could put the dumpster out here and get them in pretty quickly, and they're setting in a good clean area, so that should help out there.
All right. Yeah. The dumpster deal would just save me fuel and time of going to the landfill twice a week. It'd be nice to have it on site, and like you say, it would stay clean and what have you. But yeah, because besides the stretch wrap, you have the net wrap underneath of it,
right.
And so there's some trash. All right, this is something that we also built here on the farm during the same time we were doing our concrete pad over there. This is an inline fence feeder. We took the lumber that we had over there. Both of these ends open up, and we can put 2 round bales in there at a time. Because we used the salvage lumber, we did buy the 4 posts. The 4 posts were purchased, and the metal roof was purchased. The concrete, there's only about 3 yards of concrete in this. So I haven't put a full figure on it, but it's more like $2,500 range on this particular project. So I always look at it when you buy a hay ring, and I can put 2 round bales in there. That would require 2 hay rings. There's a $600, $700 investment there. If you have a bull in that field, he'll smash that hay ring out the first year. So anyway, we think this will help us. It's a permanent structure, and it will keep the cattle out of the mud. If you turn your camera around, you'll see a brand new baby calf that was just born, hadn't even stood up yet. Anyway, all right, so back to our hay facility. There is a cost to the roof, the cost of the slant bars, but what I say, as mentioned before, I think that by the time you buy hay rings on a regular basis, this will pay for itself in 3 or 4 years.